partners at the Natural Resources Agency and the Department of Food and Agriculture might be able to track land management activities that will improve the resilience of California's landscapes, a need that has grown in light of recent requirements mandated by Assembly Bill 1757, as well as by several other legislative and executive initiatives. Although we're going to talk a bit on this subject first, today is really about us hearing from you about your experiences reporting land management information and how the state might do this better for the purposes of tracking progress towards Assembly Bill 1757, or simply AB 1757, as well as other climate goals. We're going to start today's event by hearing from leadership across three of state's leading climate and natural resource agencies. Matt Botil, who is chief of the Industrial Strategies Division at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, Amanda Hansen, who is a Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the California Natural Resources Agency, or CNRA, and Virginia Jamieson, who is the Deputy Secretary for Climate and Working Lands at the California Department of Food and Agriculture, or CDFA.
Real quickly, what I wanted to mention is that this is important work that really has built upon over a decade and a half of California efforts to support climate smart land management, and really harkens back to the very beginning when the state of California adopted its very first climate change scoping plan in 2008, and we recognized the important role that lands play in addressing greenhouse gas emissions, sequestering carbon. Really, since 2008, we have been working and building a state strategy to deploy climate smart land management to benefit our climate, our communities, and public health here in the state of California. We've led the way in deploying new opportunities for land management through programs like our compliance offsets programs, through billions in GGRF funding, through bond funding opportunities, and through significant coordination at the state level and the local and regional level to advance land management actions. And in 2022, we took another major step, and that was in adoption of our climate change scoping plan update for carbon neutrality, and really bringing forward the role that lands can play in helping the state meet its carbon neutrality statutory directives. We, in 2022, when we adopted that scoping plan for the first time, included a quantitative target for natural and working lands, and included a target that we keep carbon stock losses to 4% or less by 2045. And that milestone in 2022 and adopting that target was then followed by work on AB 1757, statutory direction on AB 1757, my colleagues will talk about. But the real important point that I'm going to make is that now with these targets, we need to now come up with a very clear strategy on how we can track progress towards those targets across all land management actions that are happening through both our policies and programs that we have put in place over the past decade and a half, and the policies and programs that we expect will come in response to the scoping plan and AB 1757. So really excited to hear the input from you all today, and I'm going to hand it off to my colleague, Amanda Hansen, who is also going to give a couple opening remarks. Amanda?
You were funny audio and I was funny lighting. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. And thanks, Matt. My name is Amanda Hansen. As Matt mentioned, I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change at the Natural Resources Agency, and I've worked really closely with our partners at the Air Resources Board and Department of Food and Agriculture to really accelerate this work in recent years. And I want to kind of make 3 points in my opening remarks very briefly, because we want to get to the listening part of this session. First is just to sort of level set and say, we're really thrilled about having worked with the help of many experts and entities that have experience in land management to set those nature-based solution climate targets that we set in April of 2024. They are a first for the state and among sort of the most comprehensive and ambitious in the world. So very excited about this sort of new frontier for climate action. The second point that I want to make is that nature-based solutions and our investment in nature-based solutions is nothing new. Our agencies and many others actually have been investing in nature-based solutions and implementing them themselves for many years. So really what we're talking about is accelerating that implementation, but also accelerating the work to ensure that what we do in the nature-based solutions space counts toward our really ambitious climate goals. And then just the last point that I want to make is, we really have benefited over the course of the last 6 years in listening to, incorporating, and just overall sort of benefiting from input from the public. And so just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's here today, that we're really excited to listen to your thoughts and your recommendations, and just want to be very clear that this is an exchange that we could not do this work without. So really huge appreciation for everyone who's on the call today. Final note is, while I will be listening intently for the vast majority of today's session, I do have to hop off a little early. I am pinch hitting in the governor's office as the governor's climate advisor right now, and so cannot stay for the last 25 minutes or so. So apologies in advance. And with that, I will hand it off to Virginia Jamieson.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you. So pleasure to be with you all today. CDFA is pleased to be part of the workshop and the AB 1757 process. And you all probably know that agriculture comprises a significant portion of California's landscape. For example, in the landscape types outlined in AB 1757, about 9.5 million acres of cropland and 9.7 million acres of grassland. So that means that we have a significant opportunity to use nature-based solutions to increase the health and resilience of our croplands and grasslands. That can be by increasing soil health, reforesting of woodlands, reestablishing riparian corridors, all kinds of things. Nature-based solutions on agricultural lands can also help us support biodiversity and protect our communities from wildfire through activities like prescribed grazing. We know already that our farmers and ranchers are dedicated stewards of their lands, and we know there's already very likely a ton of this work happening, but it's difficult to uplift these efforts and credit the work because we don't have the data and we don't know what they're up to. We do already know that farmers and ranchers do a significant amount of reporting to various state agencies, and so I'm really interested to hear from you all today what reporting may already exist for land management activities, and it would just be really helpful to know about current reporting and the benefits and co-benefits of these things, so we can avoid duplicative or overly complicated reporting. So again, I'll just add my thanks to you all for being here, and look forward to hearing the comments. Thank you.
All right. You can just video. Sorry about that. Just one moment there. Thank you for your patience, everyone. And thank you very much, Virginia. I appreciate that kind of summary, and also to Amanda and Matt. I just want to let everybody know that today's listening session is going to be recorded for the purposes of transparency and posterity, and will probably be posted on the Nature-Based Strategies website following this listening session. So now that we've heard from leadership across state government, I would like to quickly go over the remaining agenda for today's listening session. First, I will share a presentation to orient all of you with this work and what information will be most beneficial at this time. Then after the presentation, you, the audience, will have an opportunity to tell us about your experiences, concerns, suggestions, or any other feedback that you might have. There is the agenda, and so let's get on to this. Now, Matt had talked earlier in his introductory comments about how one of CARB's primary missions is to identify and track progress made towards achieving the state's goal of carbon neutrality. AB 1279 explicitly states that it is a policy of the state to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, but no later than 2045. On the screen, you'll see an equation that at first glance appears simple, but it contains a lot of complexity behind it. This equation explains how we at CARB are thinking about carbon neutrality. That is, carbon neutrality is achieved when the sum total of all the emissions originating from industrial and fossil sources, plus or minus the net contribution of emissions from natural and working lands, minus any other carbon dioxide that we are otherwise able to remove, sequester, utilize, or store, is equal to or less than zero. The reason that natural and working lands term carries a plus and minus sign next to it is because these landscapes can act as either a sink or a source of carbon. To assess the contribution that natural and working lands make towards California's greenhouse gas inventory, CARB estimates the total amount of ecosystem carbon stored in the state's various landscapes through the natural and working lands carbon inventory. Tracking this inventory of carbon stocks over time then allows CARBs to quantify the contribution that natural and working lands make toward the state's overall objective of becoming carbon neutral. This inventory is done using state-of-the-science methods in remote sensing, modeling, and landscape ecology. CARB is also very reliant on information that is directly observed and reported on land management activities, given that not all activities affecting the state's landscapes can be captured by remote sensing. In the same year, 2022, that AB 1279 was passed, mandating that CARB identify the state's likely path to carbon neutrality, Assembly Bill 1757 was also passed. AB 1757 asked that CARB, CDFA, and CNRA identify a set of natural and working lands targets that would help California move towards its goals of achieving carbon neutrality, accelerating climate adaptation, and building resilience to future climate risks through a set of land management activities that we collectively refer to as nature-based solutions. Examples of nature-based solutions include prescribed fire and other types of fuel reduction to minimize the risk and impact of catastrophic fires, restoring disturbed, damaged, or historically altered landscapes, and conserving existing intact ecosystems through property-based legal protections. The fruits of this collective effort that Amanda reviewed in greater depth earlier on culminated in April of last year when Governor Newsom announced a full set of nature-based solutions climate targets for every landscape in California. The NBS climate targets set specific quantitative goals for increasing the health and resilience of our lands, thus supporting the ability of California's natural and working lands to contribute to achieving carbon neutrality as well as other important climate goals. To give you a better understanding of what the NBS climate targets are, I'd like to share 3 such categories of targets with you: wildfire risk reduction, forest, and croplands. Here is a table that combines the NBS climate targets aimed at reducing wildfire risk across the state with those aimed at improving the health of our forest. We've combined these 2 categories of targets here in order to give you a better feel for the variety of individual targets defined, and because there is considerable overlap between the goal of reducing wildfire risk and the goal of making our forests more resilient to climate change. I'd like to note that all of the targets actually begin in 2030 and extend up to and beyond 2045, though for ease and simplicity, we're only sharing the 2045 targets here. Furthermore, most of the targets are annually paced and therefore defined on total acres of activity per year. Targets of this type could range from implementing 1.5 million acres per year of beneficial fire, as shown in the adjacent picture, to restoring over 320,000 acres per year of forest by 2045. However, some of the NBS climate targets are percentage-based or set on achieving a fractional outcome by area for a given landscape type. One example shown here is a target of 90% of all wildfire events by area eventually being classified as low to moderate burn severity. That is, by 2045, California should be managing its landscapes well enough such that only 10% of the area burned by wildfire, on average, is a product of high severity fires. Here's another example of NBS climate targets aimed at promoting the kind of climate-smart crop management that Virginia spoke to us about earlier on. It includes one target of implementing healthy soil practices across 190,000 acres of cropland per year, as well as another aimed at reaching 20% of all croplands employing organic farming practices by 2045. What I've shown thus far is just a sample of the 81 individual NBS climate targets identified. And if you're interested in learning further about other NBS climate targets, you can find more information at CNRA's Expanding Nature-Based Solutions website by following the search shown at the bottom of the screen. Beyond just setting targets for nature-based solutions, AB 1757 further required that CARB develop standard methods for state agencies to consistently track greenhouse gas emissions and reductions, carbon sequestration, and where feasible and in consultation with CNRA and CDFA, additional benefits from natural working lands over time. Thus, CARB is required to develop methods, support data collection, and ultimately quantify the effect that these activities have on carbon and other environmental metrics. AB 1757 also requires that CNRA report California's progress made in achieving these targets and on the state expenditures made to implement the targets. Beyond Assembly Bills 1279 and 1757, CARB also has other mandates for understanding the impact that land management has on the state's carbon inventory. For instance, Senate Bill 901 requires that CARB report the greenhouse gas emissions associated with wildfire and forest management activities. Thus, CARB quantifies the greenhouse gas emissions from wildfire and prescribed fire, as well as the carbon impacts from forest management. The first of these reports was released in 2020, and the next update of that report will be released at the end of this year. There are also a number of other legislative mandates that require the state to track land management activities in some form. However, I don't have time to go through each of them individually. I'm only pointing them out here to demonstrate that the state's general interest in tracking land management is not limited to just one or two pieces of legislation. It should be clear now that the state of California, led by CARB, CNRA, and CDFA, and in partnership with other state agencies, must assess and track land management and, more specifically, the activities outlined in the 1757 Nature-Based Solutions Climate Targets. We must also assess the effect in terms of carbon and other outcomes that land management is having. Addressing this complex scientific and data-driven task requires having information on land management statewide, that is through time and across every landscape in California. To fulfill the mandate of AB 1757 and 1279, state staff need information including, but not necessarily limited to, the following. What management activity is happening? Where is the management activity happening? When are these actions taking place? And what happened, if anything, to the vegetation on the landscape? Finally, we're also interested in what funding did the state contribute to these efforts. As I mentioned earlier, Assembly Bills 1757 and 1279 passed in 2022, and were not the only initiatives within the state identifying the need to track land management activities. Therefore, it is not surprising that a myriad of other land management tracking efforts already exist. In fact, the list of these efforts is so long, I am not going to read through all of them individually. The important take-home message here is that there are already a lot of efforts to track land management activities going on right now, and that we have been working to inventory these efforts to better understand how they could be leveraged to meet our needs. And despite this extensive collection of tracking efforts already underway, we are finding that they are nonetheless still subject to some limitations. For instance, many of these tracking efforts were purpose-built to collect data according to their specific interests, such as a specific landscape or natural resources theme, a specific set of land management practices, or a specific organization or stakeholder group. And so our goal is to first make sure that we have as complete an understanding of the existing tracking methods as possible. That way, we can then fully assess whether using these efforts will provide data on all land management activities conducted on all landscapes across California and thus suit the needs of AB 1757, or whether any additional new data collection efforts may be warranted. So the question now is, how do we move forward from here? Well, some key steps we could take next include, 1, utilizing existing data acquisition and reporting outcomes if possible. Now, this is a lot easier in theory than it is in practice. The various systems already established to track land management activities do not parse and structure information in the same way, nor do they report on the benefits of those activities in the same way, which makes data consistency and comparability a significant challenge. Aggregating data from multiple tracking systems generally requires the creation of numerous Rosetta Stones or crosswalks with which to map information from one data structure to another. And when there are so many existing tracking systems to draw on, and the number of such systems is only increasing with time, what we're left with is a problem closer to rebuilding the Tower of Babel than simply getting Samsung and Apple to agree on the same set of text emojis. If we don't proactively harmonize the way that land management data is acquired and reported, then it will become that much harder for our collective efforts in tracking land management to evolve, even as our understanding of climate science and land management practice also evolves. Number two, identify existing data gaps and fill those gaps where possible. We'd also like to make sure that we're getting data from institutions and programs that are currently conducting nature-based land management practices, but may not be sharing the wonderful outcomes they're achieving through an established shared tracking system. Number three, address data privacy and security concerns. We understand that there are legitimate concerns about how land management data could be used or how the outcome of individual project or effort is assessed. However, our primary goal is to better understand the statewide benefits that these land management practices are having in aggregate at the landscape level. At the same time, we're also interested in how these benefits might be useful for more regionally focused planning efforts, which brings us to number four. Produce useful, publicly available results and products. Part of the implicit agreement in asking people to share data is that we would, in turn, provide any insights gained from assessing the benefits of land management activities at an aggregate level to groups and organizations interested in using such data for regional and statewide planning purposes. Thus, rather than having to rely on the anecdotal lessons offered by a handful of projects, we could instead provide more scientifically robust analyses of the outcomes of hundreds, if not thousands, of projects to better identify best land management practices in terms of both the outcomes they achieved and their cost effectiveness, and then share those insights with others. Number five, address reporting burdens. As discussed earlier, the general interest in more broadly tracking the stewardship of California's natural resources has been brewing for quite some time. And this is best exemplified by the numerous data tracking efforts already underway. At the same time, I have personally heard from a lot of state program managers and grant administrators, and quite a few nonprofit project managers as well, that these data reporting requests pose a considerable additional burden on top of the regular administrative burden that comes with planning, permitting, monitoring, reporting, and paying for a project. We get it. One way we can help alleviate this added burden is by finding ways of making it easier and more intuitive for project managers to report relevant project data, as well as minimize how often they have to report it. We understand that project managers don't want to be asked to report the same information in 17 different places. I appreciate those of you who are with us today taking the time to listen to CARB, CNRA, and the CDFA make their collective case on why it is important to track land management activities and how helpful this information will be to making California's landscapes more resilient for the future. However, today's event was posed as a listening session, and we meant that. So what we would like to do for the remaining time is hear what you have to say about what we've discussed so far. I want to let you know that you're free to comment on whatever aspect of land management you think is relevant to this discussion. However, we'd like you to keep the following guiding questions in mind when forming your thoughts and comments. What tracking systems currently exist to collect land management data in support of achieving climate resilience and carbon neutrality? Are there any systems that we're missing? What are the strengths and limitations of these systems? Do you or the agencies you work with use remote sensing to track land management activities? And finally, and more broadly, what else should the state be considering as we move forward? You can verbally provide your feedback on today's event by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will be offering the floor to attendees in the order by which their hands are raised. You can also let us know about any technical or logistical issues you might be having using the Zoom Q&A feature. We want to emphasize that since this event is considered a listening session, we don't plan to get into debates about the pros and cons of various land management practices, nor do we want to prognosticate exactly how the state plans to move forward. Our goal today is to listen to what you have to say and hear feedback from you on how best to track progress towards the state's targets. You're also welcome to provide written feedback on CARB's nature-based strategies website at any time up until midnight of March 21st. Just follow the instructions shown on the screen. Thank you in advance for your feedback, and at this point, I would like to open the floor for further comments, so please feel free to raise your hands. So I think we'll start with a comment from Sarah Deslauriers, I apologize if I'm not saying your name properly. Sarah, do you have a comment?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, Sarah Delorier, you were close. I serve as the Director of Air, Climate, and Energy Programs for the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, or CASA. And we represent more than 90% of the sewered population of California. So we are in complete support of the pursuit to improve soil health and increase the carbon storage across California's natural and working lands, especially in the effort to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. We do request when you ask what else should the state be considering as we move forward, that biosolids be listed alongside compost and biochar as an organic soil amendment. They are a recovered renewable resource, which will continue to be produced as long as water resource recovery facilities provide the essential public service of wastewater treatment. And we do understand that you're seeking input on methods for tracking and assessing the effects of land management practices toward achieving those nature-based carbon sequestration targets. We'd like to bring your attention to existing research that quantifies the carbon sequestration that is achieved by and also acknowledges the many co-benefits of land applying biosolids, which have been practiced for decades, including offsetting an energy-intensive synthetic fertilizer, which was noted as a gap in a previous natural and working lands model development, and improving soil health through rebuilding organic matter, which then results in improved water holding capacity and increased crop yields. In turn, biosolids reduce that need for irrigation in crops, and they're more resilient to drought. So each of these outcomes we know are targeted by the climate smart strategy and the natural and working lands model scenarios. So we did submit information on these methods or some research during the 2022 scoping plan update and the natural and working lands model development. We cited peer-reviewed scientific research that quantifies the carbon sequestration, the offsets in synthetic fertilizer, as well as the ability to increase drought resilience and reclaim fire-damaged land. So all of that through land application of biosolids. So we'll submit those citations again, as well as a few more for your consideration. And there's also a model, the biosolids emissions assessment model that's been in place for over a decade, that is also looking at assessing the benefits of beneficial use of biosolids in general, including land application of biosolids. So we'll submit those, looks like by the March 21st deadline. We just want to thank you for the opportunity to comment today. And really, the beneficial use of biosolids is a critical path to achieving statewide carbon neutrality, as well as ensuring community resilience, but it also bolsters our state's circular economy. So we're dedicated to collaborating with you all on the update to your climate smart strategy as well as the model. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sarah. All right, we have a comment from James Dunbar. Oops, hold it a second, James. Would you like to make a comment, James?
Yes, if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, good morning. My name is James Dunbar. I am the General Manager of Listec International and a member of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, CASA. Listec is a leading resource recovery technology in the utilization of wastewater treatment residuals. We are based in Northern California, but have locations throughout North America. Our company is a private service provider to the clean water sector, and we perform an essential service in the safe and secure management of biosolids and residual organics. We use these materials to produce a sustainable soil amendment for the agricultural sector in California. We support CASA's comments, as previously mentioned, and the state's pursuit to improve soil health and increase the carbon storage across California's natural working lands. Listec does agree that Listec also be listed as alongside compost and biochar as an organic soil amendment that improves soil health. With respect to reporting and notification, we think that these products should go through a rigorous certification or a review program before they're considered an acceptable product. Biosolids are a recovered renewable resource, which will continue to be produced as long as there is human life on this planet, and we are in need of food for survival. When used properly, biosolids and the products that can be produced from it do restore soil health, improve soil tilth, increase crop yields. Our company has conducted multi-year crop studies along with the researchers at UC Davis about the benefits of replacing fossil fuel synthetic fertilizers and the improvement of protein and crop yields. Certainly, we do need these materials if we're going to support our agricultural sector in the state. And all of these are for the benefit of enhancing sustainable and resilient agricultural and to mitigate the effects of climate change. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to comment today. The long-term beneficial use of biosolids is a critical path to achieving statewide carbon neutrality by 2045, and we support the goals of this effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. So we have another comment from Maile Lono Batura. Maile, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
You did a great job pronouncing my name. Appreciate it. Thanks for this
No
opportunity. My name is Maile Lono Batura. I serve as Director of Renewable Resources for CASA, also working alongside Sarah, representing the 90% of the steward population in California. Echoing Sarah, CASA supports the state's efforts to elevate soil health initiatives that will bolster soil carbon as the state works towards carbon neutrality by 2045. Climate change has illuminated the need to resource local and renewable options for saving our soils and mitigating climate change. Productive soils and fertilizer access are front of mind in supporting natural and working lands. Biosolids offer an alternative, locally available, and sustainable soil amendment. Biosolids offer non-fossil carbon and nutrients and provide ecosystem services for repair of urban environments, depleted farm soils, and disturbed habitats. At last count, the U.S. produces 5.8 million dry tons annually of biosolids. While being a lead on climate forward initiatives, California also takes the lead with biosolids across the U.S., producing 736,000 dry tons annually. It is estimated that the supply of phosphorus from mined phosphorus rock could peak as soon as 2033, and U.S. sources may be depleted in 25 years. The only three existing options for biosolids currently are burning, landfilling, and the highest use is land application, the first two being further out of alignment with California's climate smart strategies. Among the circular water resources available in all communities across California and the U.S. are these treated solids that are rich in nutrients and represent a non-fossil carbon. There's an incredible opportunity to tap into our local water resource recovery programs as they regenerate resources 24/7, 365 days a year. Biosolids can serve as part of this toolkit to achieving carbon neutrality. CASA looks forward to helping to elevate and propel these efforts moving forward. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Maile. Okay, we now have a comment from Tabor Teachout. Tabor, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you for hosting this, and I was glad I was able to have an opportunity to be present and speak. My name is Tabor Teachout. I'm president of the Biochar Coalition, and our focus is on biochar and the production of it and creation of workforces to increase the production of making it. We are working with the Board of Forestry to try to incorporate it into the Board of Forestry's practices as a methodology. I'm not speaking about power company byproduct biochar, nor am I speaking of large industrial tiger cat, but I'm referring specifically to ground-based biochar on site with ring of fire kilns. We've used them in orchards and we've used them in forestry applications, and we're documenting our locations using Google Earth pinpoints. We're also working with ICLA to capture our documented information as a recorded and measured volume of carbon with which we have crystallized and sequestered as a stable. The highest quality carbon available can be made with the ring of fire kiln and is measurable to 20% of the available 50% carbon content of all biomass. So utilizing it in the kilns can burn orchard residue on site and utilize that char directly on the soil on site. The biochar is raw and barren. It has no nutrients, so it is recommended to incorporate it with the nutrient strategy, which then could go right into the livestock industry, where cattle and lots could have biochar spread across the lot to absorb the excess emissions that are coming from the feedlot systems. So the biochar could be a byproduct of one industry in a valley and passed to another industry in the valley to sequester carbon measurably and increase the nutrient hold that we otherwise are losing through emissions of decomposition. I'm hearing this suggestion for the biosolids, and I'll have to recommend that any biosolid application be incorporated equal parts with biochar. The biochar can absorb some of the pharmaceuticals that may linger in biosolid waste. So, and toxins and heavy metals and all of that will get trapped in the biochar instead of into the plant life, which ends up in our food source. So I am trying to advocate for the use of biochar methodologies to help our landscapes, water retentions for the forest, as well as the valley orchards and farmlands. And to do that, we are documenting it using photos and measuring tools, because the kiln is a geometric object that we can measure the volume of how much we actually produce. And we've had calculations done to know that we're getting 20% of 25% available, because the carbon that's in plants, half of it's the cell wall, half of it's the cell content. When we make charcoal, we burn off and the content, but we retain the cell wall and end up with the charcoal that goes into the soil. So I would like to help and participate in increasing biochar production and utilization and documenting and tracking it, so everybody can see that we're making a stable carbon that is no longer an emission. And in using forest management, we're actually burning wood residue that took 50 years to grow, so it could have been old carbon, whereas using it in annual crop cycles, you're annually pulling carbon out of the air. So corn stalks and any other seed or oil crop, all these crop residues could be run through a biochar equipment and turned into a stable carbon that's measurable, and we have the methodologies to capture that measurement. I think that's it. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Tabor. I just want to let everyone here know that we're going to give everybody a chance to speak. So those of you waiting in line, particularly Dan, Scott, Kenneth, Arohi, and Paul, we see your hands raised and you will get a chance to speak. So we're going to go next to Dan Noble. Dan, do you have any comments you'd like to make? Dan, are you having trouble speaking?
No, I think I had it on mute somehow, or I was not unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, we can. No worries. No worries.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so Dan Noble, I'm the former executive director of the Association of Compost Producers, and that's been taken over by a new executive director this year, and I'm still very much a participant in that for the past 22 years. In addition, I've been on the planning committee for the California Bioresources Alliance Symposium, which just had its 19th annual symposium at UC Davis in November. And I have my own consulting company called Noble Bioresources Incorporated. I've formed a couple of information companies in my career prior to my engagement with compost and organics and bioresource management. One was the Environmental Business Journal, and the other was a company that was tracking environmental information nationally. So what I think is needed here is not just the individual bioproducts, which I would label, biosolids, as well as biochar, and certainly compost. The Association of Compost Producers, which just celebrated its 30th anniversary this year was founded as exclusively a biosolids composting association. But then in 2011, we became the California state chapter of the U.S. Composting Council. And in my tenure and as executive director, and looking at it from an information management, we're really trying to manage all of California's bioresources on a watershed basis. So that's, of course, the natural and working lands. And of course, we all consider compost as one of the many nature-based solutions. But in order to track it, the information consistently and through all the variations of climate, as well as fires and so forth, the framework that we're starting to use is bioresources into bioprocessing, into bioproducts. And all of that is best handled at the local level, because as everybody probably on this webinar realizes, that transporting bio-based carbon is very expensive, and you usually produce more greenhouse gases carting it around. So the idea is to manage our bioresources locally. The biochar tub grinders or the tub burners are one method. The other is, of course, local composting or chop and drop, where you're managing your cellulose carbon locally within the forest watershed. One of the other things that came up for me is that water, whether it's rainwater or recycled water from the wastewater treatment plants, is itself the primary bioresource, because all bio requires water. There is no bio without it, and all bio contains water. Even from woody biomass to organisms like our own bodies. So managing not only managing bioresources or organic carbon along with is part of managing water, both in terms of its use as well as the management of the water in the watersheds through building healthy soil. In addition, it's about managing the nutrients, as Miley brought up, relative to biosolids, because a lot of nutrients, we excrete all those nutrients and they need to go back into the environment. And
Dan,
but when, yeah,
Dan, I don't want to interrupt. These are wonderful comments that you're making, but we have a lot of people also would like to speak.
Okay, so all I'm saying is that there's a process where we as an association can engage with your group in natural and working lands to really get into the details of how do you manage all of this data in real time and have everybody access that data through a bioresource asset inventory process. That's my comment and perspective, and I would like to understand how we could engage as professionals with you agencies in order to make this happen.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dan. Those are great thoughts.
Yeah, Dan, I'm maybe you just dropped off there, but really want to encourage you to give us some written feedback if you can, particularly on this first question, and maybe as an association or other recommendations you may have on how we at the state level could intake data that would track the application of various different bioresources, because it is part of the land management strategy, but we want to understand what information and tracking systems may exist that will help us better assess what's actually currently happening on the land. And if your association has some of that information or has started to establish those information sources, we'd love to hear about it. All right, Jim, feel free to go to the next one.
Fantastic. The next person we have here is Scott Hatfield. Sorry, let me launch 1 second. Do you have any comments you'd like to make, Scott?
Yeah, can you hear me? Great.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping and expecting this was going to be a little bit more of a question and answer format. So I'm going to take some broad strokes here and not get into more specific measurement methodologies for timber extraction. So I'm wondering how much you're relying on ISO 21930 for life cycle assessment for construction products rather than defining your numbers more from field biology and basing it on empirical measurements. So ISO 21930 is what the timber industry uses to define itself as a net zero industry overall. 21930 is very large for all of life cycle assessment. This part about the timber industry is just a small section of it. But it relies on stable national forest stocks as the definition of net zero. This is very erroneous. It relies on counting that once a forest or a bunch of wood is removed from a forest, it is instantly replaced elsewhere in a stable national forest stock. This is an unreasonable definition of net zero, and I would like CARB to please incorporate the time value of carbon into this methodology. There's a lot of pressures for you to move in this direction. When carbon is released now, it does a lot more damage compared to carbon released 20 or 50 years from now. The other question I have has to do with promoting sustainable forestry. CARB says that it wants to use this exercise as an opportunity to support sustainable forestry. That should be commended. However, you have no verification of any type of harvest techniques or forest management strategies. It's all just up in the air and left to kind of flutter in the wind. I would like to see CARB promote more FSC certification of wood products and not SFI, which is a timber industry wood certification program. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Scott, for those wonderful comments. At this point, I want to let everyone know, so far we have another 5 hands raised, and we're going to go in order in which they're raised. And that would be, actually, sorry, 6. It would be Kenneth, Paul, Manuel, Arohi, Peter, and Eugene. So we're going to start with Kenneth Scherer. Kenneth, would you like to make a comment? Or I should just, before we go on to Kenneth, I think, Matt, do you want to make a comment on the last thing? Okay. Sorry, Kenneth. Let's go on to hear what you have to say. Please feel free to speak up and tell us what you think.
Is that me? Okay, great, excellent. Yes, I'm with Biochar Coalition. You heard from Tabor, although my concerns are with regulatory jurisdictions, exclusively like countywide. We've run into a lot of issues with air boards trying to do our burns with our pyrolysis chambers, and we've had to sit down and have conversations. And we actually, the science is out there, but people are unaware of alternative measures and community-based projects. And when we advocate to our local communities, there's a lot of grassroots support, but then when we get to the policy side, there's a huge stagnation, and we just need things to be defined, I think. This is where the carbon tracking would come into play. So my hopes are that we can associate other third-party community-based data tracking initiatives and support that and establish legislation, establish grants that fund pilot grassroots projects exclusively. So we're not being pitted against competition with big guys like bio salt dudes and stuff, because we need all kinds of solutions, right? We need to advocate to community grass scale, because that can be scaled up community-wise. You can have 1 million people burning a kiln every season versus one central biosalt or pyrolysis chamber that's centralized, that's reducing their efficiency by trucking. So I would say, please help us define place-based biochar and also define its characteristics, its quality, and work with other organizations to make sure, at least beginning by 2045, we set a benchmark for at least 50% reduction so we can have something to look forward to. Thank you.
All right, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Kenneth. The next person we're going to hear from is Paul Mason. Paul, let me just get you queued up. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
I do. Hey, thanks for hosting this today. And I guess I just want to start by thanking both CARB and the Resource Agency for how they've been implementing on AB 1757 from 2022. I think it really has been a great opportunity to highlight the important role that natural working lands can play for climate adaptation and mitigation. And we're going to need to be doing a lot more in that space in the coming years as we're preparing for the climate that we're going to be living in, and continuing to try and meet our long-term greenhouse gas reduction goals. So beyond, that appreciation, I want to flag a couple of ideas, which are less on the remote sensing side, or at least one of them. Um, One of the areas where we can make a lot of gains going forward, and this is reflected in the targets, are working forest conservation easements that are legally binding, easements that will change how forests are managed going forward. And Pacific Forest Trust does a lot of these. We've got 100 and some odd thousand acres of them in California, mostly with large commercially managed timberland owners. And when we are developing those easements and appraising their economic value, because they have value even if they're not removing development rights, when we are out in, let's say, important habitat and watershed priority areas, where we're going to change how that forest is managed going forward, retain more large fire-resistant trees with better habitat value, et cetera. Those changes in management will create more carbon on the landscape, but they also have an economic value. And so we go through a process that's well developed, state sanctioned, federally recognized in terms of how the terms of the easement are managed or are modeled to figure out how it's going to change management. It would be pretty easy to crosswalk that economic assessment of how it's going to impact future timber production to understand how the terms of that easement, many of which are state funded and are part of our, climate action, are achieving permanent, durable increases in carbon on the landscape. So, I mean, these are different than necessarily what is currently on the landscape, but it helps us know what the sort of minimum legally allowed carbon carrying on that landscape would be over time. So just, I think there's an important opportunity there, especially if we want to be estimating the impact of state investments in these sorts of projects. The other issue I just wanted to flag, and I put this in the Q&A chat as well, is there's a new low Earth orbit satellite network going up, shorthanded as FireSat. It's organized by the Earth Fire Alliance. It's going to have much more rapid reassessment of fire starts and fire severity, ultimately throughout the world, but it's going to be available in California first within the next couple of years. And that will allow us to have a much more nuanced assessment of the impacts of fire, especially this will be most significant in forest lands, in terms of whether we had a high severity fire that released a lot of carbon or a lower severity fire that had less impact on the standing carbon stocks. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that project. It's being coordinated by the Earth Fire Alliance, and I put that URL in the chat. So I think that's it for today. Really appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you jumping in and offering some feedback. One kind of question for you to ponder on, and maybe give us some written feedback if you have it, or just later on, is whether or not you've got recommendations for the staff here on ways that they can track conservation easements being executed on lands over time. Less about like the effect of individual easements, more about like the totality of all easements being executed and being able to keep a ongoing kind of ledger of those as they change over time. I think would be helpful for us to understand what those data sources may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can follow up with you on that.
Fantastic. Wonderful thoughts, Paul. Thank you for sharing. And right now we have 4 other hands raised just to let everyone know. We have Manuel, Rohi, Peter, and Eugene in the queue. And we're going to go to Manuel Cuna. I apologize if I'm not saying your name properly. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share, Manuel? You might try unmuting your Zoom screen if that seems to be the issue. I tell you what, hold that thought, Manuel. I think what we'll do is we'll go to the next person, Arohi Sharma, and then we'll definitely get back to you, Manuel. You'll have an opportunity to speak. Let me just do something. This. And so, Arohi Sharma, are you with us? Would you like to propose a comment or some sort of feedback on what you heard today?
Absolutely. And I hope you all can hear me. Thank you for this opportunity to provide input, and just wanted to share that we've appreciated all of the time, energy, and resources that all of your agencies and the NGO community has provided to inform the Natural and Working Lands targets set in 2024. My name is Arohi. I'm a senior policy analyst with the Natural Resources Defense Council. So as we enter this measuring, monitoring, and reporting phase, CARB and CDFA and CNRA have a unique opportunity to simultaneously meet the obligations under AB 1757 and 1279, while also filling a larger gap in the state's emissions modeling efforts, specifically for agricultural N2O nitrous oxide emissions. The science is clear that we can't meet these targets, these climate goals, without addressing nitrous oxide emissions, particularly from non-point sources. Nitrous oxide is a key contributor to climate change, with a global warming potential that's almost 300 times higher than carbon dioxide. And according to the recently published United Nations Global Nitrous Oxide Assessment, N2O is currently the most abundantly emitted ozone-depleting substance. Natural and working lands are a major source of California's N2O emissions. Our agricultural soils emit 6.8 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent as nitrous oxide, which accounts for about 23% of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. And this means that that soils contribute almost about 60% of the state's total N2O emissions. Elevated levels of nitrous oxide are also a major threat to the safety and well-being of Californians. CARB's 2022 scoping plan also notes that California isn't doing enough to measure, monitor, or abate these agricultural N2O emissions. So as CNRA and CARB and CDFA figure out how to comply with these state laws and meet these state goals and targets, we want to emphasize the strong need to measure and monitor agricultural nitrous oxide emissions. Specifically, we urge you all to connect with academics that are already doing this measurement work across the state, and we're happy to make those connections for you all in an email follow-up. We also specifically urge you to fund nitrous oxide data collection across multiple scales, from field chambers to flux towers, which CARB can start with its annual and 5-year strategic research funding effort. And lastly, we urge you all to connect locally and regionally collected nitrous oxide data into publicly available data sets like FluxNet and next-gen modeling software like Earth observation. So thank you again for hearing me out this morning, and we look forward to partnering with you all on our asks, and thanks for your time.
Wonderful, Rahi. Thank you for reminding us that carbon dioxide and methane are not the only greenhouse gas out there. At this point, we have 3 people in the queue. We have Manuel, Peter, and Eugene. Manuel, we're going to try to get back to you, see if hopefully you can get online. Do you have any comments for us, Manuel?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for doing that. I appreciate that very much. The high-tech world is a little heavy for me. But first thing is that I want to make sure that information collecting on farms is confidential. I don't trust anybody anymore for what people have done to our farmers, going out and doing and taking monitorings and doing things on their own, going onto private property and all of that. So monitoring is going to be a big issue for us. I don't care what agency. CARB knows where we are with that strongly. Dr. Cliff knows that. Secondly, I understand into and all of these things, but if people want to eat, then they better not kick the farmers in the teeth and kick them out of the state that they're trying to feed the world in. Number three, biosolids, recycled product has to be a food safety issue for my farmers across the globe. Foreign markets, are we putting biosolids on products that they don't want to have products on? So all of this has to play into role. And if we're going to implement any more programs by the state of California, through California Resources Board, CDFA, then incentives are going to have to be there 100% to help our farmers. And incentives are going to have to be long-term. Case in point, agriculture San Joaquin Valley has no burn program in its valley, the 8 counties. We were assured that we were going to have incentive fundings helping our farmers chip, incorporate, grind, use air curtain burners for those type of crops that may have disease that we cannot incorporate at all. And we're not going to go into composting because that's grinding. When you grind, disease, spores, and those things move. So we were promised in going into the no burn programs, which we did a great job, but now the governor has yanked all the funding. So agriculture wants to be there to make sure that, and we are taking care of our soils, and we are irrigating with the best and everything we can to preserve our land, because the soils are so important to us. But when we are told by people who just have an objective to sell their goods, we got real problems with that. But I have problems with giving permission to take our data and start scoping out our farms where farmers have this activity or not. So we have to be more conscientious about that. But to Matt and everybody on this call, that agriculture has been there. In the San Joaquin Valley, we have CMPs, conservation management practices, through NRCS. And we've done a great amount of job in doing things to reduce all types of activities. So if we're going to use air curtain burners, which we are, and we're going to use carbon burners, of how cost effective it is. But that has to be a part of this whole equation. And we can no longer be said we're going to have funding and we get a lousy 20 million and we're asking 33,000 farmers to do things in this state. I think we need to worry about what happened to Los Angeles here a couple of weeks ago. And maybe they need to be learning how to take care of manage their forests and their lands better. So, but thank you for the time. We look forward, but we're not going to allow people just coming on our land and trying to use satellites to see what we're doing and everything. Because then we might as well shut down the farming industry in California and ask us to move. And that can't happen. So, but thank you for your time very much.
Hey, Manuel, just a quick comment / question for you before we go on to the next commenter. So when we were developing the scoping plan and the AB 1757 targets, we heard pretty consistently from the agricultural community that there were quite a few climate smart land management actions that folks were already undertaking: implementation of the NRCS conservation strategies, application of compost, for instance, and that they were really interested in figuring out a way in which kind of like those existing actions that they were taking for various different kind of crop health and land management health, that those existing actions would get reflected, and they would essentially kind of be able to take advantage of the fact that they were already doing this in our broad state strategies. And so I guess kind of a question, back to you in keeping with the theme of this workshop would be, how would we do that? What kind of data sources, what kind of information kind of already exists that growers may be reporting on their use of compost, for instance, or their implementation of NRCS practices that they're already providing? What kind of information can we look at that's already out there that would help allow us to do the thing that we were asked to do, which was basically reflect what good practices the growing community is already doing in these targets?
Great question. And Matt, you know me, and you know what we want. We would be more than happy to sit with you and the staff face to face and go through those things that we are currently doing and what we'd like to share and how we share it and what other, and there's conflicts. The State Water Board is one of those that is very difficult to deal with composting activities of certain types. But we would be absolutely willing to sit down with you and walk through those things so you can get, as you described, some type of credit for the things we are doing, and we should get credit for the great things we're doing. So after the call, if you want to call me or Roger, or we can work with you and our air district and our partner over at NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, Johnny Siselsnoff. We'd be happy to do that. More than happy to work with you.
Thanks, Manuel. And yeah, anything you want to put in writing, or we can possibly follow up later, but appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you for those wonderful insights, Manuel. Right now we have a few more hands up, 3 of them, Peter, Eugene, and Brian. So what we're going to do now is we're going to Peter Roediger. I apologize if I'm not saying that properly. Do you have any comments you'd like to make on what you heard today?
Yeah, and no worries on the last name. Yeah, so I'm Peter Rudiger, and I'm also a member of the Biochar Coalition on the coast here. And yeah, just to reiterate what Ken and Tabor mentioned a little bit, regulatory limitations are very much a concern for me as well. There's just like not a lot of education around gasification or pyrolysis systems, and they're still very much classified as like nothing more than a burn barrel for the air boards, and yeah, that's a concern. Also, as far as data tracking, there is. We've also been working with Wihan Becker, who is the CFO for African Data Technologies, and this is aimed at measuring the amount of carbon in the flame cap kiln, ring of fire kilns that we use for very big land management practices and projects. So that, and also to alliterate what Tabor said, the char is really it's the crossroads between water and the fire, not just for the adsorption capacities, but the overall health of the soil. So I'm in with that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Those wonderful comments that you made. The next person we're going to hear from is Eugene Turkov. Eugene, would you like to make some comments or provide us some feedback?
Yes. Hi. Thanks for hosting this session. So my name is Eugene Turkov, and I'm from the NASA Ames Research Center. I'm part of the Decision Support Systems Group. I'm a software engineer, computer science role. And I actually work on 2 projects. One is called Ilios, and another one is called Mission Tool Suite. And both of these projects rely on a system that gathers data from multiple different types of data sources and brings it into one place and makes it so that people can query the data. And we have a UI that essentially allows you to overlay different types of instrument data on the screen. So I don't want to read from text here, but I'm just going to read 2 quick little blurbs about each system to give you guys an idea of what they do. And I think this might be useful because one of the goals, I think that, if I understand correctly, that you have is to bring data together in one place and actually make it useful. So I could really see some powerful algorithms that could be implemented that could help answer the question of how much carbon is being produced and whatever other types of science questions we might have. So for Ilios, it stands for Intelligent Long Endurance Observing System. And the project develops software to improve spatial and temporal resolution of remote sensing for greenhouse gases. Ilios uses existing data from satellites, aircraft, and other coarse-grained data sources to identify target locations to be observed in more detail using emerging sensors and high-altitude drones. And so there's some AI in there. There's tracking and identifying methane and NO2 emissions, flight planning with those things in mind to maximize the science deliverables from those from the research. And so, of course, the interface allows climate scientists to interactively develop and evaluate plans and ask for explanations as to why a particular target should or shouldn't be included in an observation. That's about Ilios, and then MTS, Mission Tool Suite. That one is basically the intent of the system is to encourage more responsive and collaborative measurements between instruments on multiple aircraft, satellites, and on the surface in order to increase scientific value of the measurements and improve efficiency and effectiveness of flight missions. So those are the two projects, short and sweet. I'm the guy that does the data on the backside, and just wanted to throw that out for you guys in case that was something that you wanted to look into as potentially additional data sources, or maybe, did you want to share ideas? So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Jim, you're muted.
Apologies, everyone. That was just a classic Zoom error. I just wanted to thank Eugene for the wonderful work that he was sharing with us, and I'd like to move on to Brian Shobe to see if he has any comments or feedback he'd like to share.
Yes, thanks, Jim. This is Brian Shobe, and I'm the Policy Director with the California Climate and Agriculture Network, or CalCAN. First, I want to echo a few comments that folks have made previously. So Paul Mason's gratitude to this administration's work to implement AB 1757. I also wanted to second Arohi Sharma's comment on the importance of nitrous oxide emissions. And third, I wanted to echo Manuel Cunha's comments about ensuring that farm level data are confidential and shared on farmers' terms, and ensuring that that data is used to support farmers who are early adopters of those practices or who are transitioning to using those practices. I wanted to add a few comments in addition to those, and in response to your questions here on the slide, around systems that can support the tracking of the croplands and grasslands targets. And so I'm going to name 4 different potential systems here. The first is the State Organic Program, which tracks land under organically certified management. That is state-managed data that is reported annually. The second is the National Ag Statistics Service Ag Census, which already asks farmers about land acreage under conservation easements, land acreage being managed with cover crops, and land acreage being managed with no-till or reduced tillage. That is federally managed data, so has no cost to the state and can be disaggregated by county. But there are some obvious limitations to that. It only occurs every 5 years. It's aspatial data, and it is a long process to change questions or add questions to that survey. But that is something that we would be happy to discuss with state agencies if there's an interest in trying to change that survey. The third system is, or the third set of data is the state's fertilizer mill fee. And with that, the reporting from the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Both of those, I guess, regulatory programs or fees can track the overall use of synthetic fertilizers in the state, and provide a 30,000-foot view of nitrogen use efficiency. But again, of course, that data is aspatial and is not tracking input substitution, which we know is increasingly happening with the increasing cost of fertilizer. And then lastly, we don't work with any companies that are using remote sensing, but our understanding of remote sensing is that when combined with machine learning, it can track practices like hedgerows, cover crops, and possibly tillage practices to provide the state with landscape scale data. That space is obviously still evolving, but would be interested in continuing conversations to explore that. And then I'll just end with, we work with a number of farmers and researchers who have been at the forefront of practicing and researching these systems and practices. And we would be happy to connect further with agency staff to talk about ways to coordinate research, monitoring, and data sharing going forward in a way that's mutually beneficial. So thanks again for the work, and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. Those are some very wonderful pointers that you gave us. At this point, I want to note that there's one more person we're going to get to, Tim Bailey, but that is the last hand that I see raised. I just want to encourage anyone else here that if they do want to stand up and speak up and provide us with feedback or comments, they're more than welcome. We'd love to hear from you. So at this point, what I'd like to do is give Tim Bailey the floor and give him a chance to provide us with some feedbacks and commentary. Tim, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, and I want to express my appreciation for this program. And I think it's, especially right now, this is an absolutely critical program. The one point I would want to reiterate is the need for granular metadata in forest treatment programs. I've worked both as a shared stewardship advisor for U.S. Forest Service projects, and I'm currently a co-PI on a CAL FIRE Forest Health Research program that's tracking 2,000 treatments across the state right now. And one of the things that has been a persistent problem is actually the quality of reporting on actions that are actually occurring on the ground. And this is especially acute in the post-fire environment. There is some of the standard post-fire remote sensing strategies are fairly problematic with post-fire management decisions that are such as salvage harvesting, and we need much better quality data on actions that are occurring on the ground in the post-fire environment in particular. And in the past, I've worked on projects that have had task remote sensing, project scale task remote sensing for post-fire, and that is an avenue to dramatically improve the understanding of management actions on landscapes. And as another component of this is that, often we are looking at beneficial fire events that are actually fairly hard to track with our existing data sets. And so those are things that I think that there needs to be a real focus on. As was in the presentation was noted, the desire to get to a much higher proportion of low and moderate severity wildfires. The carbon implications of those are very challenging. One of the things that I think the Air Resources Board could be in position to support is continuing to invest in airborne LiDAR on a timely basis. Currently, of the 2,000 treatments that we're tracking for our project, 475 of them have multi-temporal LiDAR coverage through in a 2 to 5 year period. And there are large portions of the state that are still waiting on release of first coverages by public LiDAR data sets. With the current budget, we do not have LiDAR for multi-temporal coverages for large areas, particularly in the Klamath and Coast Ranges, where the Sierra Nevada has had a much better coverage for robust carbon monitoring with remote sensing driven coverage. So those are things that I think are I would consider them challenges with the current technologies that we have applied. I want to thank you again for taking our comments.
Thank you, Tim, for sharing those wonderful insights regarding remote sensing. At this point, we're going to go to Christopher Black, but before, I just want to let John and Scott know that you're in the queue and we see you. So Christopher, would you like to share some of your comments or feedback with us today?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. My name is Chris Black. I'm with Pools and Fluxes LLC. I'm a consulting scientist focused on carbon cycle modeling. And one repeating theme in my work is that we want to incorporate remotely sensed management information into the models we create. And what we find over and over again is that the availability of ground truth management data is really a bottleneck for validating the remote sensing algorithms we want to use. These are the ground truth information is typically collected on a case-by-case basis from a very small number of locations, and it's challenging to determine how representative these are. And so I'm really, it's great to hear all these folks today discussing the new management approaches they've been trying and talking about reporting outcomes from those. And I want to highlight how useful those outcomes could be, not just for accounting for the effects of those management practices on the ground right now, but also for incorporating those approaches into future model assessments. And at the same time, I recognize that when I say it's really useful to have information about management on the ground, that goes directly into some of the privacy implications that I've heard people talk about today. And I recognize that this information can be sensitive, and I would love to have the state be able to share the information that it already has about some of these management practices in a way that protects the trust that the land managers who shared it with the state had, and that can let this information be used in many ways without me needing to gain the personal trust of the land manager who actually implemented the practice. And I recognize that the real question you all are asking today is what systems exist. And I just want to say that whatever system, it would be great if once you have collected all that, there's a way to make it available to the public in a way that is useful to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Chris. Yes, outreach with the public and privacy concerns are definitely something we are keeping in mind going forward. And the next I'd like to hear from is Scott Anderson. I'm sorry, I apologize, John Anderson. John, would you like to share any of your comments or feedback with us?
Yes, you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, thank you again for having this opportunity to discuss this matter. I'm the Director of Forest Policy for the second largest private timber landowner in California. The list that I saw for your sources of information looked very valuable, from the Caltree's information to Watershed Mapper, and also the interagency information that comes from the Governor's Wildfire Task Force. Really shows all the sustainable forest management projects that are occurring across the state, and fuel reduction projects, which are so important to try and save the forests that we have left due to the millions of acres, literally, that we've lost over the last 10 years. And to continue to be have those forests be carbon sinks, it's imperative that we keep continuing those projects, keep monitoring them. We've had some comments about the timber industry here, and the forest practice rules that we have here in California are the most stringent anywhere on the globe. And I've yet for anybody to challenge me on that. So we should feel pretty comfortable in the activities that we are doing in this state. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say they're the most comprehensive anywhere in the intergalactic universe right here in California. And we are an FSC certified company, and I can tell you when we became FSC certified, it resulted in very little changes on the ground because of the forest practice rules. Two other quick points. I haven't heard anything about forest carbon projects that are scattered throughout the state. We have a few as well, and those go above and beyond even the forest practice rules and retain carbon for 100 years. So that's quite a commitment for a landowner. So that might be another source of information. And also the importance of using this biomass. Manuel talked about, the lack of finding a source for it. And we have a number of idle biomass facilities. It'd be great to have some support for that, to be able to have a home for some of this material, especially as the state moves towards 1 million acres of treatment. So tracking any of those facilities that come online, and there will be an effort this year to do some of that, would be valuable, I would think, to ARB as well. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, John. So at this point, I'd like to go back to Scott Hatfield. I think he's come back with us with another comment or some piece of feedback to share with us. Scott, would you like to share that with us?
Yes, I would. I'd like to bring up the topic of fire. I haven't heard many people talking about fire today, although I know that there are some experts who will definitely be weighing in much better than I can. At any rate, looks like you're assuming that there's some sort of instantaneous combustion of all the biomass or the vast majority of it when you have a fire go through a forest. You're not accounting for mixed severity burns, as far as I can tell. You should be able to acknowledge a lot of the research that shows that around 80% of tree carbon is left over after even severe burns. Soil restoration is slow, but this carbon from the trees that have been partially burnt is very important. They provide structure, function, and biology. Salvage logging does a lot of damage. It prevents regrowth. It damages soils. There's compaction, invasive species. And then there's a lot of foregone sequestration that salvage logging prevents, especially due to soil issues. As plants come back, soil becomes much more permeable. This affects water supplies. Without this regrowth, you invite a lot more erosion as well. Assuming more instantaneous combustion of all the biomass, like it's all severe burns, that can also skew logging data as well, as far as minimizing fuel reduction logging damage compared to home hardening is what you need to be doing to protect people from wildfires rather than benefiting extractive industry, often miles from the nearest structure. I've peeled a number of timber sales where that's been the case as well. So we're hoping that you can take a look at some of the ground-based empirical studies that are showing that a lot of that tree carbon remains even after severe burns, rather than just writing it all off and using it as an excuse to justify more commercial logging. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I just wanted to follow up on that comment real quick. Appreciate it. So in terms of the fire emissions and how we account for that within CARB is we know about this 80-20 general ratio of carbon being left versus combusted. And so I welcome you actually to go watch this webinar that we had, this workshop we had last week, 2 weeks ago. You can find it on our website here through this path that we have on the slide here and rewatch that webinar, and we discuss how we address the carbon impacts from wildfire. And we have actually a very in-depth process of how we assess the emissions from wildfire, both from a carbon stocks perspective and also a fire emissions perspective. And these are two different things. And so we do track fire emissions, and you can find that on CARB's wildfire emission website. And this uses a fire emissions model called FOFA, first order fire effects model. And it generally also produces these same outcomes of 80-20% split. Generally speaking, on average. Of course, it depends on fuel moistures, fuel loads, things like that. So we have fire scientists that work at CARB. We also work closely with the Forest Service and CAL FIRE. We definitely understand these issues, and we appreciate you bringing those to our attention.
Thank you for that wonderful response, Adam. We got one more comment from Peter Rudiger, if I think that was a proper way to pronounce your name. Peter, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up with what the gentleman said about the forest rules in practice. Carbon is mentioned about 12 times within that whole book. And one thing I know the Biochar Coalition would love to see is an amendment for that practice to better reflect the state's climate goals. And so that's primarily been our work with the Board of Forestry. And just want to reiterate, it's not just the board. Or I think there needs to be more collaboration between all these boards, water board, air board, if we're going to meet these goals. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. Okay, I guess we're revisiting comments. We have another comment from Kenneth Scherer. Ken, do you want to share anything? You'll probably need to unmute your Zoom screen.
There we go. All right, I'm back. So yes, a quick comment. There is plenty of data available for the slash piles that are existing that they've been, I think it was like 2022, they gathered a lot of data about this, and there's incredible amounts of metric tons of slash out there that's being converted into ash. So the data is a lot of it's already out there, and getting the boots on the ground and getting people who are on the field the utilities and the tools they need to document this data is paramount. So I would highly recommend reaching out to people who are doing it and working with them and getting them in your fold and really dialing this in on the data, because the information, people are trying to do it. And I think this is what we're trying to accomplish here today, is establishing this network so we can actually get the data. So in that mind, if we can reduce 10% of what that report was on there, we'd have 1 million tons of carbon within a year, and assisting local efforts, people who live there, giving them jobs to do this work, give them the jobs to report it, train them. I think that's where we need to go to make a difference by 2045. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. At this point, I'm not actually seeing anyone else raising their hands to speak.
Hey, Jim, I know we're pretty much at the end here. Just wanted to follow up and encourage Kenneth to also, if you can be more specific, maybe in writing in the comment doc we have for the workshop on the data on existing slash piles, like the data sources, and that would be beneficial to us. Appreciate it. All right. I think we have heard from everybody that has raised their hands at this point, right, Jim? Are you going to close us out?
Yeah, I think we've heard from everyone and even a few people more than once. And so we really appreciate all the wonderful feedback you've given us today. I would ask everyone here to take one last look at that slide on the screen, so that if they want to file or present us with additional feedback, there are definitely ways they can do it via the Nature-Based Strategies website. So at this point, I want to thank everybody for coming today and hearing what we had to say and sharing their comments and thoughts and insights with us. And I'd like to bring this meeting to a close.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.